Rental properties are often seen as a symbol of cash flow that just keeps coming in, but people think they're really hard to acquire. So the truth is there's several ways that you can add rental properties to your portfolio. And today I'm going to talk about 6 different ways and some strategies. 6 ways to acquire rental properties. That's what we're going to be talking about today. All right, what we're going to be covering is how to find and finance rental properties. We're going to jump into a word of warning for getting into real estate rental properties. So if you're considering that, some things you probably should be aware of to make sure that you're not going to be getting yourself into something you're not going to be happy with. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about my management style and some things that I think you should be looking at. Now, let me be clear with all 6 of these ways. I don't think any of these are better or any of them are worse, okay? So it's like, oh, this one's better, this one's worse. I think they're just different, and it depends on your individual circumstances as towards what is the best for you. What may be the best for me is probably not going to be the best for you, and what's the best for you, it probably isn't going to be the best for somebody else, which is why I'm going over these 6 different ways, because it really comes down to your personal situation that'll make this determination. So some things to consider before we jump into these 6 ways is, what is your management strategy? A lot of people think, hey, I'm going to get into rentals, but they don't know how to manage rental properties. So I think it's really important that you start with what your management strategy is going to be, because a lot of people get into rentals and they find out they hate it. Actually, that's a way that you can find properties, is you can do the non-owner occupieds, and more than likely those are going to be, a majority of them are going to be landlords, and a lot of those landlords are not going to be interested in the property. And you can actually look and say who has multiple properties or who only has 1 property or 2 property, and you can be contacting those guys as well. So you want to make sure that you're cut out for rentals. And I think the biggest mistake I see people make is they hire the wrong tenant. Okay, when I say hire, I mean that. Like, I look at a tenant as a job applicant, and they need to prove to me why I should give them the keys to the kingdom. If you really think about it, they're giving me $1,000 or $2,000, and I'm giving them the keys to an asset that's worth $500,000. Like, I want to make sure they're going to take good care of this. I think that people don't look at it in that, and they just are worried about the payment. They're worried about the money, and they just put anybody in there. But what they don't realize is putting the wrong person in there can be very, very expensive. So you've got to have a solid plan before you start getting into the rental game. The other thing I would say when it comes to this plan is trust and never verify. Trust and always verify. Who put these slides together? Kate, we're going to have to tell Johnny's going to have to go over these again. Trust and verify. That's what we've got to make sure. So trust but verify is really what we want to be doing. So lots of people do background checks, which you should be doing, credit checks, which you should be doing. And one of the big things that people don't think about that's really important is doing eviction checks. In most places you can see if this tenant has been evicted. And it's interesting because I'll talk to attorneys that do eviction and they're like, this guy's a repeat offender. Like, they have people they have evicted, these attorneys have evicted them multiple times from different properties, from different landlords, okay? So these people that have problems typically have problems again, which is a way for you to say, this is not somebody I want to give my $500,000 asset to take care of. So make sure you have a management strategy, and that's not what this is about, but I wanted to preface this with that. You've got to have a solid management strategy. You've got to make sure that you know what you're doing in that, and if you don't, figure that out, okay? So I want to give you a little bit of a tip from my management strategy, which is different, and everybody's kind of got something different. This is mine. So I go after what are called B-class properties, which basically B-class properties are properties that aren't your really expensive, nice high-end, but they're not like your C properties, your D properties that are gonna be high maintenance. A lot of people get into real estate and start buying properties in these D and C class neighborhoods, and it looks good on paper, but the reality is they have high turnover, they have lots of problems, they're gonna be spending a lot of money on the properties, they're gonna spend a lot of money advertising to find new tenants, and the list goes on and on. So I started out with some probably C properties. I had maybe 1 D property. And what I mean, how do you decide if it's an A, B, or C? A is the best, B is the next, C is the next, D. And this depends on area, school district, price ranges, those types of things. There's not a direct line in the sand, but I want you to get the concept of this, okay? And then I quickly moved up to B-class properties. I will tell you, B-class properties, you're gonna make less money on paper than C or D-class properties, but you are dealing with rougher neighborhoods if you're going into those. So part of my strategy is to under rent. So if the market is $1,000 for rent, I'm gonna rent it for $900 or maybe $950. I'm always gonna be $50 to $100 less than the market. Well, why would I wanna do that? Well, I figured out the math on this, guys. If I can under rent it and I can keep someone in the property for a longer duration, I actually end up making more money by charging less. And this is why. Even when rents rise, right? If rents are rising, I'm saying, hey, I'm gonna raise rents because I want to be competitive with everybody else, but I'm still going to give you $50 to $100 less, which means the tenant's like, well, I can't find anything better. And I even tell them, hey, go see what you can find. If you can find something better, let me know, because I'll give you $100 less or $50 less or whatever than what you can find out there. And moving sucks and you don't want to move. And they're like, yes. So if they can find something, great. The other thing this allows me to do is it allows me to find the very best tenants, okay? I get the very best tenants because good tenants are looking for great deals, and I get lots of applications, and I'm able to screen those applications, and I am able to hire the best tenant like we've been talking about. I do all the checks and the background checks. So I have people literally fighting over my property because it's the best deal in the best condition. Now, what do I want in return? So I really treat a tenant like an owner. So they have to take care of the first $50 of work. They have a $50 deductible for anything that may go wrong, anything that they need. They have to contribute that. And because of those things, and because I'm renting single family houses, I'm getting people that are staying longer, and my average tenant stays about 5 years on average, which is phenomenal. When I was dealing with the C and D class properties, I was probably lucky to get 3 to 6 months. And I'm not saying you should jump right into B properties. Maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. Like I said earlier, there's no right or wrong. It's just being aware of the situation. So I go after long-term tenants. So I want a tenant, if a tenant's not planning to rent for me for at least 2 years, I am not interested in renting to them. I want long-term tenants, and I would really want people to stay their lifetime and their kids' lifetime is really what I want, the longer. Because here's the thing, turnover is really expensive. Turnover is the cost for you to carpet clean, the cost to repair some things, the cost to run your ads, the cost for you to find tenants and do background checks, credit checks, and all that type of stuff is all the cost of turnover, not to mention the loss in revenue you're not getting because of not having rent coming in. And even if you do find a tenant, they may be another 2 or 3 weeks before they can actually move into it because they've got to give their landlord notice, and it takes more time, even if I find the right person. So for me, it's how can I keep people staying as long as possible? And the way I do that is by giving them a discount over market rates, but expecting them to stay for a long period of time and treating them more of an owner than a tenant. I am not the Marriott. You can't call and say, hey, my lights are out, come fix them. No way, Jose, that's not how I operate. Now, are there people that do operate that way? Yes, but I am not one of them. But to do that, you're gonna save yourself some money, but I expect you to deal with some basic things when it comes to the house. If there's something major, let us know. We're gonna take care of that. That's part of the conversation I'm going to be having with each one of the tenants. Getting stuff rent ready is so expensive. Vacancy is very expensive, as we've been talking about here. So determine what types of properties you wanna go after. This kind of goes back to the discussion of the A, B, C, and D type properties. Which ones should you go after? Which ones shouldn't you go after? It really depends on a few things. We're gonna talk about it. So there's single family houses, right? Single family house, just a house. That could be a condo, it could be a row home, it's a single family house. Then we jump into what are called duplex to fourplex. A duplex is there's 2 dwellings next to each other, or one on top of each other. It is zoned for 2 units. A threeplex is zoned for 3 units, and a fourplex is zoned for 4 units. Anything fourplex and under is considered a single family loan type situation. It's not a single family house, but it's gonna be in that single family loan type criteria, because there are people that will buy a duplex, live in one side, rent out the other side, and that is gonna be considered a single family. Now, when we talk about commercial or apartments, we're talking about more than 4, okay? So we're talking about 5 to 500 is really what we're talking about when it comes to a commercial, and that is a whole different animal and not something we're gonna be talking about. So there's also industrial, there's office, there's warehouse. Those are not things that we're gonna be talking about on today, but there are strategies there as well. Single family, this is my preferred, okay? As long as you have it in good areas. The positive of this is tenants usually stay longer and they are more established. That is a big positive to me. The negatives are if your tenant leaves, you have no income. So if you have a duplex and one of them leaves, you're probably getting income from the other side. So if they leave, you're getting no income, and that can be a negative. But I would much rather have that and have a tenant stay 5 years than what I'm gonna talk about next, which is duplex, threeplex, fourplex. So I used to do this. I owned a lot of plexes. My father was really into plexes. He loved plexes. I started with plexes and quickly learned this is not what I want, because plexes are higher management from my perspective. There's some positives. You typically have better cash flow. But the better cash flow is typically just on paper. Some of the negatives is you have transient tenants. You have people that are not planning on being there long term. And even if you've got a great tenant and they're gonna move in 6 months, you gotta go replace them with another great tenant, and that becomes a problem and it becomes expensive. Tenants can get upset living so close to each other. I've had this tenant gets mad at this tenant and they both leave in the middle of the night because they don't like each other. That's not a good situation to be in when people are on top of each other. And I think there is more management when it comes to duplex, threeplex, fourplex. Now, is this always the case? No, there are exceptions to every rule, absolutely. But as a general practice, these are some of the things that I think you will find the difference between plexes and single family houses. Now, when we go to apartments, which I've got wrong here, this should be 5 to 500. I do these, if I'm doing these types of deals, I do them in limited partnerships or general partnerships, which basically means the general partnership is the one that's putting the deal together. Somebody there has found the transaction, somebody there is signing for the loan, somebody there is taking over for management, or they're hiring management. A limited partnership is just where I'm putting up some money and I own a percentage of that specific deal. It takes lots of money and net worth to buy these types of properties. I don't think the average person listening to me right now is going to be wanting to get into those properties, or should be getting into those properties quite yet. You've got to increase your net worth, increase your cash flow, make sure you've got stellar credit, and start working on getting a portfolio. And there are some economies of scale as you get bigger in that. Now, the key to this is the key to everything. Location, location, location. You've heard it and you're gonna hear it again. Real estate is all about location. This also includes rental properties. So what is happening in the area? Are rents going up? Are rents going down? Are rents going sideways? Those are things that you need to be looking at so you have a good idea of what's happening in that area. There's a couple of questions that you're gonna wanna answer is, how many rentals are there in the area? How do you know that? Well, you look for rent signs, you look on Craigslist, you look on rents.com and try and get an idea how many rentals are actually in this area. The other thing is property taxes, okay? You gotta make sure property taxes are not too expensive, because if they are too expensive, you are gonna find yourself not making any money. The other thing we wanna talk about is the quality of schools. How good are the schools? And we're not saying it's gotta be the best schools, but you just wanna make sure it's not the worst schools. You know, I'm a CB type student. That's what we're looking for, is we're looking for a Honda. We're not looking for a Lexus, but we're certainly not looking for, I don't know, what's a crappy car, a Fiat? Of course, I guess they're coming back, but maybe there's some crappy. I don't know. Okay, so crime in the area. How much crime, and more importantly, what types of crimes are happening in the area? It's one thing if there's crime, it's another thing if there's violent crime. It's another thing if there's theft and burglary and shootings and all that type of stuff. Next thing we want to be looking for is amenities like grocery stores, shopping, parks. There's got to be things to do, and there's got to be jobs in the area. Employment opportunities, the next thing that we're really looking for when we are looking for these ways of acquiring rental properties. Now, let's jump into this. What are the 6 ways to actually acquire these rental properties? Let's jump right in. Number 1, buy as owner occupied and then rent it later. You buy it, you stay there, then you later rent it and buy something else. These are the 6 ways, and we're gonna dive into them here in just a minute. Number 2, use a line of credit from your personal house to help you buy a rental property. Number 3, roll over your 401k to self-directed and use that to purchase real estate, a rental property. BRRRR, which is buy, renovate, rent, and refinance. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. Number 5, you just buy it as a non-owner occupied property. That's how I started buying properties. I just bought it as non-owner occupied. And number 6 is student housing, looking at buying properties that are using in student housing. So let's dive into each one of these just a layer or 2 deeper on this. Number 1, buy as an owner occupied and then rent the property, okay? You can do this with your home. You buy a property, you move into the property. Maybe you increase the value by doing some repairs or putting some things or painting, or whatever the case may be. Maybe you finish the basement, and maybe you don't do any of that and market values just keep creeping up, okay? Then what can you do? Well, then you can rent that property and go and buy a new property. And if you're doing that every few years, you're gonna have a pretty good portfolio when it's said and done. So that's something you could do, is just using those houses that you're living in and moving them to the next stage of you buying something else. Now, does this mean you got to buy a more expensive house or a bigger house or put in all these crazy things? No, you've got to be pretty conservative with this, because you want to be making sure if you're buying A-class properties, those don't make great rentals. So you want to make sure you're buying those B-class type properties. There's also this, the rent goes down. There's declining returns as you go up in the classes of properties. If you did this every 2 or 3 years, you'd have a bunch of cash flow before retirement age, not even by retirement age, way before a retirement age. Plexes, 2plex, 4plex, all considered single family. You can buy one and live in the other side. This is you buying it. You can buy one, live in a side, rent the other side. This could get you free housing or very discounted housing that could allow you to gather funds that you can then use for another investment property. Don't go spend that money. So that's a way to do this. Now, number 2 is using a line of credit on your personal house. Well, what is a line of credit? Line of credit is also known as a HELOC, Home Equity Line of Credit is what a HELOC stands for. So basically you can tap into the equities, your home's equity, okay? This money can be used for a down payment on another property. You only pay when you have the money out. This is one of the things a lot of people don't understand. When you're getting a HELOC, you could get a $100,000 loan. But if you don't take that money out, then you aren't paying anything on it. And lots of times you can get these loans without any fees attached to that. And most of the times your credit unions will actually pay for the appraisals and other things with that, okay? So a lot of great ways to get this money. And then what do you do with it? Well, you can get some HELOCs on non-owner occupieds. There's some credit unions that will do these in first position. From time to time, you will find HELOCs on non-owner occupieds second position, okay? So keep your ears out for that, because that can be really helpful as you're trying to grow your portfolio of real estate rentals. And I will tell you, growing the portfolio of real estate rentals takes effort, takes money, takes time, and you don't see the reward for quite some time. It's gonna be 10, 15 years before you're like, I'm really glad we did this. It's kind of like planting the tree. It takes a long time, it takes a lot to get it there, but once it does, it gives incredible shade. Call it the money tree. The idea is you get a HELOC, okay? You use that money to buy another rental. You do the repairs to that rental, you refinance that rental, and then you pay off your line of credit, and then you do it again. So it doesn't mean you have to do it every month, but you could do it every year or every few years or whatever you're looking for. But that's the principle, is getting a line of credit, taking the money from there, getting it to another property, improving the value of that property, refinancing that property, and getting the money back to your HELOC. Now, you've got to be very careful with this, because the takeout financing that you're going to be getting, which is going to be from a bank, a credit union, not from a hard money lender, you want to make sure they're okay with you getting what they call cash out, meaning cash to you. Lots of times, if you can justify all the repairs that were done and that you're just getting back the money you put into it, lots of times they will look at that, and sometimes they'll say that's cash out. Maybe a higher rate, may not want to do it. You've got to shop around to make sure you've got that before you go and purchase this property. All right, number 3. Roll over 401k to self-directed. Okay, if you have some type of retirement, depending upon how much money you have in there, you can actually roll that over to a self-directed. And with that self-directed, you could use those funds to just go buy the property if you had enough money, or buy the property and get a loan. There are some technicalities around getting a loan for your self-directed, and there are a lot of hoops to jump through to get your retirement account into a self-directed. It takes a lot of time, but once you do it, it helps you grow your net worth considerably. All right, number 4 we're gonna be talking about is the BRRRR, BRR, which stands for buy, renovate, rent, and refinance. So you're gonna say, why would I wanna go through and do all of this? Well, the idea is that you can buy with little to no money and end up with a piece of real estate, okay? You can use the income from the rental to qualify for the new loan that you're going to be getting for the financing, which really helps with your debt to income ratio. Number 5, buy as non-owner occupied, okay? This is where you simply just go find a rental, you put 20% down, and you rent the property out, and you keep doing that every time you can get enough money to put 20% down. You keep buying new ones, you buy the best deal you possibly can, and you try and improve the property value. And as you do that, and hopefully appreciation takes its effect, that's what's gonna happen, and you will grow your rental portfolio. Number 6, and our final, is student housing, okay? What is student housing? Now, I'm not talking about official student housing. What I'm talking about is housing that's rented to students that is near your type of college communities, but is not maintained or oversight from the college itself, okay? This type of thing can be very lucrative because you're renting things by the room, but you also have to be careful because in the summertime, you could have no one there. You also have to make a decision if everyone is responsible for everyone or if you're only responsible for yourself. Those are things you've got to look into as well. So buying properties near colleges, and then you can rent those out as we talked about it. Now, as always, I like to give a bonus because I love you guys. And the bonus way I'm gonna talk about is nightly rentals, VRBO, Airbnb. This is another way to acquire, okay? The first thing with this is you wanna make sure it's zoned for that type of purchase, okay? You are in the hospitality business. You are not necessarily in what I want to call the real estate business. What you're doing is having them have a great time at the location, at the property. You are having to go in there and clean it and change sheets and those things, not every night, but in between when you have tenant to tenant. So you've got to be careful that you realize that you are in the hospitality business and you're in the business of creating experiences. So let's run through this again. 6 ways to acquire rentals. Buy as an owner-occupied and then later rent the property. Get a line of credit on your personal house and use that money to help you acquire a rental property, refinance that, and pay your line of credit back. You can roll up your 401k to a self-directed and use that money in conjunction with some other money. In order to do that, there are some provisions, some things you gotta be aware of. Just make note of that. BRRRR, buy, rent, or buy, renovate, rent, and refinance is a great strategy to do this. Buy properties just as non-owner occupied. Get your 20% down and make it happen. Student housing, where you're buying close to some of those colleges, but it's not overseen by the student housing. And then my bonus is nightly rentals or Airbnb, VRBO, those types of things that you can be looking for great investments to acquire rental properties.